Hello, and welcome to Open Education Analytics. My name is Chad, and with this video, I'll walk you through the machine learning environment in both Synapse as well as Machine Learning Studio. So, a short outline for today's information. I'll begin with a brief idea of what is machine learning, which is sort of a buzzword that a lot of people have heard of, but I want to give a little bit of background so we're all on the same page. I'll also explore machine learning done in Synapse using two different approaches, as well as machine learning in the Azure Machine Learning Studio using three different approaches. And then I'll cap things off by mentioning how to schedule machine learning pipelines by leveraging the Synapse pipelines. So before we dive in, what is machine learning? I'm going to get at this from the big picture point of view, but this is one perspective which I think sort of hits the nail on the head in some ways. So traditional programming, a lot of people have heard of, right? So writing code that performs some sort of task. This diagram illustrates exactly that, right? So for traditional programming, you have a computer, you give it some sort of data, and you write your own program or computer code to do something with that data, right? As a result, you generate some sort of output that you wish to produce. And this is how computer coding typically is done, right? The drawback of traditional programming, I think, is that when the data becomes incredibly complex, this program needs to be incredibly complex, right, in order to achieve whatever output you desire. So often writing computer code to handle these really complicated situations is just intractable. Machine learning takes the same approach, but reverses it in a sense, right? So down here, this is the basic outline of what machine learning is about. You feed your computer now data, but also the outputs that you wish to obtain, right? The computer looks at those two things and generates for you a program that you can use. So one example of this classic one in machine learning is image recognition, right? I feed my computer lots and lots of images, and I label all of those images based off of what they are. The more that I feed it, the more the computer can understand the connection between that data and that output. And if I allow that computer to think in very complex ways, it can generate a program that can be used for new data, right? And when it comes to something like image recognition, this traditional programming approach is very, very hard, right? Because the amount of things that you can see in an image, the different positions, the different perspectives, makes writing traditional code quite challenging. So that's the big picture view. Um, where is machine learning used? Up on top here are quite a few classic areas that you see today, right? Machine learning is the idea behind self-driving cars, robotics, video tagging, image classification. The goal of these top three things is automation, right? Can I build some sort of algorithm that does this for me, uh, even if it's very, very complex? In education, there's a lot of advantages and potential here as well. Some of the major fields you see are things like adaptive learning, right? Can I develop some adaptive learning path custom for each individual student? Can I flag students who are at risk for either dropping out or getting lower grades? Can I create a digital tutor for every single student? Each of these tasks are hard to attack in the traditional coding view, but machine learning is sort of the easier way to leverage these problems. I'm also going to hint that instead of just automation, another perspective is generating insights. If I can create for myself some sort of model that understands these scenarios really well, I can use that model to gain understanding of the problem at hand, right? So more on that to come. All right, so now that we have a feeling for what machine learning is, let's see what we can do within Synapse and Machine Learning Studio. So I'm going to jump to the Azure portal, the sort of landing page for everything Azure. I'm going to navigate to my Synapse workspace and just open the Synapse Studio using the link that appears below. And using that link here, and I already have it up and going, we'll get to our Synapse workspace. And the beginning will be this familiar homepage, right, that we're used to landing on. And for this video, I'm going to focus mostly on the Develop tab, right? So I'm going to talk about two different ways you can do machine learning in Synapse Studio. The first is using Synapse notebooks. And here I created a demo machine learning model notebook, which I'm going to load. And this machine learning model is building a predictive model on some existing data that I have here in Synapse. And I'm going to find that data so I can have a look. So under my databases, let's make you a pinch smaller. I have an attendance database. And the table that I created keeps track of student attendance. So it's this table here. And I'm going to view that table quick just by querying it via SQL script. And this is a small toy data set, right? So data sets can get more complex than this. But we can see pretty quickly what the structure of the data is. And I'm going to structure this as a machine learning, so a prediction task. So what I have here is a bunch of students with person IDs. They belong to a certain school. And on a certain date, they logged into some digital activity for a certain number of minutes. Each of these students, separate from this, are determined to be making satisfactory progress towards their attendance status at school. The thing I'm going to predict is this value here, so satisfactory progress. And my main question is, can I predict if a student is in good attendance standing or not? And if I can I understand the contribution of these other variables involved? So my first approach, back to that Synapse notebook, is right here, using familiar machine learning packages in Python. So I'll pick on Pandas and NumPy for my computational and data structure needs. I'll pick on scikit-learn for my modeling approach, which I'll just use a logistic regression model to classify a student as being either satisfactory in attendance or not. I pull in my data from my data lake using Spark. And then I spit out some information about my data sets, right? So I can see those same columns that we saw just a moment ago. I can tell what object types they are, so whether they're strings or objects or dates or integers. And this is also a peek of the data, right? So the same data that we looked at just a moment ago. I can do any data exploration here I want, right? So that's completely up to you. One thing I did here is created dummy variables for the school name. So that stores my data as for that individual school name as a 0 or 1. And I also explored the number of students who have satisfactory attendance. And this is a bit artificial data, so in this case, there aren't that many. There's 1,000 students out of my roughly 7,000 total students. I can split into train and test sets, build my logistic regression model on a training set, and then I can go about evaluating the results of those model predictions. And if I go ahead and do that, whoop, I skipped ahead. I can print any sort of metrics I want, such as my accuracy of my model. I can compare predictions versus true solutions, right, and see how the model is behaving with respect to the different classes. I can also compute regular metrics like precision recall F1 score and a number of other things like receiver operating characteristic curves as well. So this is a good way to start with machine learning in a way that gets you very familiar with your data, and it's very fast to prototype different machine learning models. That's our first approach in Synapse. And a nice thing here is you can save these and you can share them and you can use them as a starting point for any modeling that you wish to do, right? So that's good. A second approach is in my Synapse workspace, if I go to the Manage tab here, right? So this bottom tab on the main menu, so Manage, I can link my Machine Learning Studio workspace to my Synapse workspace, right? So that's this first one right here. So now this is a link service, which means I can connect these two different services and let them play off each other in some ways. If I go back to my Data tab, you might have noticed when I loaded that table into SQL, there's actually a machine learning option here, right? So Instead of building a notebook and doing all my processing by hand, I can leverage some of the automated work that's done in Machine Learning Studio. And here I'm going to run that table by enriching with a new model. And what this will do is it'll give me a prompt to connect to my machine learning workspace and select which column I want to predict. So in this case, I'm going to predict whether the student has satisfactory progress in attendance. I can select what compute I want to use, and I can even configure that compute by giving it more executors or more memory. I'll leave the default and hit continue. Here I can select the type of problem I want to do. So here we were working with classification. So is my student making satisfactory attendance progress or not? But I could also predict a number using regression or do time series forecasting based off of time series data. So I'll select classification. And here I have two options. Option one is I can select what my primary metric is. Maybe I care about accuracy, maybe I care about area under the curve. I'll keep the default of accuracy. I can also set some parameters about training time and iterations. And I can just click run at this point, and it'll kick off that experiment to my Machine Learning Studio. If I want, though, I can add in some flexibility here and click create in Notebook. And what this will do is this will give me all the script that Synapse wants to use to run things in my machine learning workspace, but it'll allow me to do some data processing ahead of time, right? So if I don't want all the columns in this table, I could just select the ones I want, and then I could even change some different parameters in my machine learning run, and I can submit it from this notebook, okay? For me, though, I just launched it using the automated selections. So I'm going to go back, and this run was just sent off to my Machine Learning Studio instance. So back in portal.azure.com, I'm going to go to that homepage, and I have my machine learning option right here, right? If you don't see yours in your recent resources, you can go to all resources and find it in the resource group it belongs in. But once I load my Machine Learning Studio, I should be able to see that experiment running in the background. Okay, so here I would click Launch Studio, but I already did that, and here is my Machine Learning Studio. I can see down here that there's different runs that were completed, right? And the one that I kicked off here is called run number 1. It has this encoding, just a name that was created under this experiment name, which has my Synapse workspace, the table name, as well as a date timestamp as well. Instead of clicking that directly, I'm going to give a very brief tour of the Azure Machine Learning Studio. Just like in Synapse, there's a menu over here on the left-hand side where you can select a number of different options. I'm going to start in the Notebooks option. This will look a lot like the notebooks that we saw in Synapse, right? So you can load Python notebooks, you can write scripts, you can save them in your own folder, you can borrow them from other users. I'm going to go to the Samples tab, and under the Samples tab, there's a number of machine learning ones that I can pull from. I'm going to use this one here, which is Create First Machine Learning Experiment, and I can see in here there's a Python notebook, which I'm going to load. And if I want to change it, I can clone it to my folder. For us, we're just going to have a quick peek and see what it does. So this looks a lot like the code that we looked at a second ago. You can connect to workspaces, connect to your data source. You can name experiments, load your data, break it into train and test. So all the usual machine learning tricks. And it's nice too in these notebooks, you can build documentation in, you can add images, and it gives you a way to write these models back and register them so that you can use them again in the future if you want to. Okay, so there's a lot to explore there. I recommend these tutorials, they're super good. There's also a number of other tutorials if you go back to the homepage. There's other resources down here at the bottom, right, in the different learning modules and tutorials as well. I'm going to go back to this main menu though. So notebooks are good. Automated ML, that was the same thing that we just did from the Synapse workspace. So by doing that option that we had over here, right, so by connecting and enriching with a new model in the Synapse space, it's actually configuring and running an AutoML run, right? So AutoML has a lot of features. You can click, you can read all the different documentation. I'll point at that here in a second. But I'm going to click on my experiment that was just run. And you can see all the work that was done in the background. So it gives me different statistics about the runs that were done, how many of them were. I can compare different accuracies if I rerun these models again on perhaps different data. I can click down here, my run ID. So that's the one run that I kicked off. And you can read lots of different information about that run, right? So you can see when it started, how long it took. You can find the best model, what its accuracy it was. If you go to data guardrails, you can read all of the automatic data handling that was done when it came to this AutoML run, right? So splitting the data into validation and test sets, it found that my classes were imbalanced, which we saw in that little graph from before. So it actually went about balancing my data for me, right? So this part right here was handled. And missing features were filled in if there were any, and high cardinality features were detected as well. I can change some of these as I desire. Also, a number of models were run, right? So instead of that one model in the Synapse notebook, I should see here a list of multiple models that I can dive into and even save or deploy for future use. I can even use these models to score my individual database if I wanted to. I can also view outputs and logs, right? So to monitor the activity that happened. I can view all the individual runs, right? So all the individual models that happened. For this case, I'm going to go back to the experiments tab, and I can see that there was a final run that was executed, right? So this one is the top performing run, and I can measure any metrics I want to about it. So I can look at accuracy, and there's a whole deep dive into model explanation and fairness as well that you can tap into. So that's pretty nice. I did all of that by initializing AutoML via the Synapse workspace. To read more about AutoML, if you click this menu here or just search for AutoML, there's a lot of documentation around this, right? So the Microsoft documentation is very good. But this image tells you what all this automation is about, right? So it's all about automating your data handling, automated your models that are run, and automatically selecting the top model by using the criterion that you distinguish. So the automatic tuning of these complex models is quite convenient, right? It can take a lot of time to do this manually. So we have notebooks, we have AutoML. One more feature here is in the Designer tab, and if I click this, this is a GUI interface for designing machine learning models that's a lot more user-friendly than, say, writing code. It's often a good place to start if you haven't seen this before. So I just clicked one of those tutorials that were available. And you can see all the different pieces of machine learning that appear as you go through, right? So you can select whatever your data set is. And in this case, they're identifying income by binary classification, right? So basically the same approach we were using. And you can see how they selected columns. They have a Python script that's run, splitting the data into train and test, and scoring the final models, and then doing some post-analysis on the predictions. Within this list, you can select any data set you want. You can upload a local data set or use a registered data set. And in our case, by running things from Synapse, I have a data set now available. So that table is here. If I want to use this data set and try out some of these features, I can do so. Okay, so that's the big tour of Machine Learning Studio, just from a high-level view. One last thing I want to mention is by connecting these two workspaces, there's one more feature that's useful. Back in the Synapse workspace, if I go to the Integrate menu item, I can see that there's pipelines that I can create. So here I'm going to create a new pipeline. And if I want to schedule running a machine learning model that I built on new data, as that new data comes in, I actually have that option here, right? So I won't create that property, but I can see now there's a machine learning option way at the bottom. And in that option, there's a bunch of things I can do, but the one I want in this case is machine learning execute pipeline. And this lets me call automatically from Synapse a machine learning studio pipeline and run it on new data that's pouring into my lake. So that's the last quick peek on leveraging machine learning from Synapse. Let's go back to our slides and recap the ideas in this video. So what did we do? We talked about the idea of machine learning and how it's used, so we have a decent feeling for the terminology here. We showcased two different ways in Synapse that you can execute machine learning. The fastest and simplest way is machine learning notebooks, and you have a lot of control over your own data. But a powerful way is by calling AutoML through the Machine Learning Studio linked service. I could also do a lot of this in Machine Learning Studio. You can run your own notebooks, you could do a designer sort of drag and drop GUI interface, and you can use AutoML just like we invoked from Synapse. If I want to schedule machine learning pipelines that I have a model I want to run on new data as it comes in, you can do that as a Synapse pipeline in a very quick and efficient way. All right, that's our brief tour on machine learning and Synapse in Machine Learning Studio. I hope you enjoyed.